Welcome back, everyone. Today we're gonna go deep on something that might make you look at Washington a little differently. We're diving into Kash Patel's Government Gangsters,
Oh, yeah.
a book that pulls back the curtain on what some call the deep state and its potential for reform. And I think what's really fascinating about this is we're getting this insider's view
Right.
from someone who was right there in the Trump White House battling this so-called deep state firsthand.
Yeah.
Now, I know this topic can get a bit controversial. We are going to stick to the facts, focusing on Patel's experiences and what we can learn from them. Ever feel like things in Washington are a little off? Well, Patel felt that way too, and his story might just surprise you.
Well, what's really striking about Patel's background is how unconventional it is.
Mhm.
Here's a guy who went from being a first-generation immigrant and golf caddy to holding top legal and national security roles.
Yeah.
And he wasn't initially drawn to politics at all, but this particular case really pulled him in.
That's right. He started as a public defender, representing people who often couldn't afford legal help, and this experience was really formative for him. He saw the flaws of the justice system up close and personal.
Yeah, and he even noticed a certain hypocrisy among some of his fellow public defenders. They claimed to champion due process, but would shy away from tough, complex cases. Patel, however, felt very strongly that everyone deserved a fair trial, no matter the charge.
And he really took that idea of due process to heart. He talks about a time when he caught a federal prosecutor lying under oath, withholding evidence that could have helped his client. This experience really highlighted the potential for abuse within the system, even in the pursuit of justice.
Yeah, this commitment to due process seems to be a recurring theme in Patel's career, almost foreshadowing his later battles against what he saw as deep state corruption.
And from public defender, Patel then became a federal prosecutor at Maine Justice, and that's where he got involved in the Benghazi investigation.
Right, and it was during this investigation that Patel started to see what he believed was political influence interfering with justice.
This is where things get really interesting. Patel claims that despite evidence against numerous terrorists involved in the Benghazi attack, the Department of Justice chose to prosecute only one. And he believes that this decision was made to protect Hillary Clinton's political future rather than pursuing a full and impartial investigation.
Yeah, and this brings up a really important point about selective prosecution. When the justice system appears to be used for political gain, it erodes public trust and weakens the entire foundation of the rule of law.
This experience with the Benghazi investigation really solidified Patel's distrust of what he perceived as a deep state operating behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And this distrust would become even more apparent during his involvement in the investigation surrounding the Nunes memo.
Right. You might remember the Nunes memo. It alleged that the FBI had misused the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, to target the Trump campaign. FISA is a powerful tool that allows surveillance of suspected foreign agents, but as Patel's experience suggests, it can be misused.
And Patel actually hesitated to take on this role in the House Intelligence Committee. He wasn't a political person, and this investigation was highly charged. But he eventually agreed to lead it in exchange for a position on the National Security Council later on.
It's a testament to his dedication to national security, even in the face of such a partisan environment.
So tell me, what exactly did the Nunes memo allege?
Well, the memo claimed that the FBI had used flimsy evidence, largely based on the Steele dossier, to obtain a FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page, a former Trump campaign advisor. And remember, the dossier was funded by the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. This raised serious questions about the motivations behind the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign.
Patel even describes this memorable encounter with top FBI agents who couldn't refute the facts presented in the memo and resorted to stalling tactics and obfuscation. This experience further fueled his frustration with what he perceived as the deep state's resistance to transparency and accountability. The release of the Nunes memo triggered a huge backlash against Patel.
Yeah.
He faced accusations of being a Trump loyalist and was smeared in the press. This episode really highlights the personal cost of challenging the status quo, especially when powerful institutions feel threatened. But Patel maintains that he was simply seeking the truth, even if it meant facing those consequences. He felt that exposing potential abuses of power, even within the intelligence community, was crucial to protect American democracy. His experience with the Nunes memo served as a key takeaway. Blind trust in institutions, even those responsible for national security, can be incredibly dangerous. It reinforced his belief that individuals need to ask difficult questions and hold power accountable.
That brings us to Patel's next big step inside the Trump White House.
Talk about walking into the lion's den.
He finally landed his dream job at the National Security Council. But even there, he faced pushback from what he saw as this deeply entrenched deep state.
Patel claims that he was targeted by anti-Trump officials within the NSC, even being named in the Trump impeachment inquiry, despite having no involvement with Ukraine. It seemed that the deep state was determined to undermine anyone who challenged their power.
He even brings up the insurance policy text messages between FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Remember, they discussed needing an insurance policy in case Trump won the election, even before any evidence of wrongdoing had emerged.
This incident, along with others Patel describes, raises some serious questions about the potential for abuse when individuals within powerful institutions allow their personal biases to influence their actions.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to the balance between national security and individual rights and the dangers of unchecked power within the government.
It's a theme that runs throughout his story, and it really makes you think about the importance of vigilance, of holding our leaders accountable, and demanding transparency from those in positions of power.
Now, while we've heard about the challenges and what Patel saw as the bad side of things, he also talks about his positive experiences with dedicated individuals working to protect America. He contrasts those experiences with the bureaucratic roadblocks and infighting he witnessed.
One of the most exciting parts of the book is his account of the Baghdadi raid. Patel played a key role in coordinating this operation, being in the Situation Room as it unfolded.
This raid was a high-stakes mission to capture or kill Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. And Patel describes the palpable tension in the room as they waited for updates and the eruption of cheers when they received confirmation that Baghdadi was dead. He paints a very vivid picture of the raid. Meticulous planning, the bravery of the Special Forces operators, the suspense as it all played out. He even talks about the incredible feat of securing Russian airspace for the mission.
And he shares a touching anecdote about President Trump requesting a photo with him after the raid and inscribing it with "Great job, Kash." It really humanizes these high-pressure situations and highlights the camaraderie that can exist even in the midst of chaos.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of government, there can be moments of triumph and genuine connection.
Yeah.
But those moments are often overshadowed by the reality of bureaucratic infighting and entrenched interests. And that's precisely what Patel encountered next as Chief of Staff at the Department of Defense.
That's where he came face-to-face with a whole new type of deep state, the military-industrial complex.
Here the complexities deepen. Patel describes encountering resistance to President Trump's efforts to withdraw troops from various conflicts. He argues that certain officials within the DoD were more focused on protecting their own interests and those of defense contractors than on achieving peace.
This gets to the heart of Patel's critique of the deep state.
Right.
He argues that it's not just about political ideology, but also about power, money, and preserving the status quo.
He's suggesting that powerful institutions, whether it's the intelligence community, the justice system, or even the military, can become self-serving, prioritizing their own survival and expansion over the needs of the American people.
And that brings us to one of the most pivotal and controversial events in Patel's story and in recent American history, January 6th.
This is where the stakes escalate, and Patel's deep state narrative takes a dramatic turn, raising important questions about the events of that day and their aftermath. Patel recounts being at the Pentagon on January 6th, watching the events unfold on TV, waiting for the call to deploy the National Guard. And he really emphasizes the specific legal requirements for deploying the Guard, which he claims were eventually met, but not without delay.
And that delay is a crucial point in Patel's narrative. He argues that President Trump had already authorized the use of the National Guard days before January 6th, directly countering the narrative that Trump was hesitant or obstructive in responding to the violence at the Capitol.
This raises an important question about the timeline of events and the decision-making process on that day. Patel is really pushing back against the idea that Trump was in any way complicit in the attack, asserting that he acted decisively to ensure the Capitol was secured.
He even highlights how quickly and efficiently the National Guard secured the Capitol once the request came through. This underscores the preparedness and professionalism of the military, which often gets lost in the politically charged discussions surrounding January 6th.
It's important to remember that the military, despite the internal challenges Patel describes, can effectively carry out its mission when given clear directives.
But Patel doesn't stop there. He goes on to challenge the very label of insurrection applied to the events of January 6th, arguing that the term is exaggerated and politically motivated.
This is where the discussion gets particularly controversial.
Yeah.
Patel acknowledges that there were individuals in the crowd who engaged in violence and destruction. However, he maintains that there's no evidence to support the claim that it was a coordinated attempt to overthrow the government, as some have alleged.
He points to Trump's speech that day where he urged his supporters to march to the Capitol peacefully and patriotically. He also mentions that the FBI had information about potential violence, but didn't share it with the Department of Defense or other relevant agencies.
Right.
These are details that often get overlooked in the broader narrative.
Patel suggests that multiple failures, both in terms of intelligence sharing and security preparedness, contributed to what happened on January 6th. It's not just about one person or one decision, but a complex interplay of factors that led to that day.
And he raises questions about the motivations of those who have pushed the insurrection narrative, arguing that it's been used to justify cracking down on dissent and targeting Trump supporters. It's about how a particular narrative can be used to shape public perception and policy decisions.
This is a significant point. Patel connects the events of January 6th to a larger pattern of government overreach and the suppression of dissenting voices.
He goes on to discuss what he calls the weaponization of domestic terrorism, arguing that the term is being used to silence conservatives and suppress free speech.
To illustrate his point, he cites alarming examples like the FBI investigating parents who protested at school board meetings.
Right.
He sees this as a dangerous expansion of government power, where legitimate dissent is being labeled as dangerous.
He even quotes President Biden's speech where he labeled Magier Republicans as a threat to democracy.
Think about the implications of that statement. When political leaders use such strong language to demonize their opponents, what does that mean for everyday Americans and their right to express their views? It raises concerns about the potential chilling effect on free speech and political discourse.
Patel isn't afraid to tackle these controversial topics head-on. He delves into the core of these issues, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about the state of our democracy.
It's a challenging conversation, no doubt, but it's one we need to have. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, Patel's experiences raise critical questions about the balance of power, the role of institutions, and the future of free speech in America.
He's not just throwing out accusations. He backs up his claims with specific examples, documents, and firsthand accounts. He wants us to think critically, to question the narratives presented to us, and to seek out a variety of perspectives.
And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not about blindly accepting one side or the other, but about engaging with complex issues, examining the evidence, and forming our own informed conclusions.
And amidst all this, Patel doesn't leave us on a completely bleak note. He talks about his work with Truth Social, the social media platform launched by President Trump, as an attempt to create an alternative space for free speech and open dialogue. It's an interesting example of how he's trying to put his ideas into action.
This is a key point. He's not simply complaining about the problems he sees. He's actively working to create solutions, to build platforms where dissenting voices can be heard without fear of censorship. It's a message that transcends politics. It's about the importance of critical thinking, independent thought, and the courage to challenge the status quo.
It's about reclaiming our agency as citizens and actively participating in shaping our democracy. We've covered a lot of ground here, from Patel's early days as a public defender to his time in the Trump White House and his subsequent endeavors. We've seen his firsthand accounts of what he perceives as deep state corruption, his battles against government overreach, and his efforts to promote transparency and accountability.
One of the key takeaways is that this fight, as Patel sees it, is far from over. It's an ongoing struggle to protect our freedoms, to ensure that our institutions serve the people, and to hold those in power accountable.
It's a fight that requires constant vigilance and engagement.
And it's a responsibility that falls on all of us, not just those in positions of authority. We need to stay informed, get involved, and be willing to speak out against injustice wherever we see it.
And sometimes that means questioning the narratives we're presented with, even the widely accepted ones. It means digging deeper, looking at the evidence, and forming our own conclusions.
It's about being critical thinkers, not passive consumers of information. It's about recognizing that power can be abused, even by those we trust.
And it's about remembering that the future of our democracy hinges on our active participation, our willingness to engage in difficult conversations, and our commitment to upholding the principles of freedom and justice.
So we've explored Patel's story, but now it's time to turn the lens inward. What resonates with you from his experiences? What are the implications for your own life, your own community? How can we as individuals contribute to a more just and accountable society?
These are the questions that Patel's book leaves us grappling with. They're questions that demand our careful consideration as we navigate the complexities of our political landscape. It can feel a bit overwhelming, can it? Like, how do we even begin to address these complex issues and systemic challenges?
It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these, deeply entrenched systems. But Patel's story does offer, I think, a glimmer of hope. Remember, he began as an outsider, someone outside the political establishment, yet he managed to make a difference. He exposed what he saw as corruption and challenged the status quo. It suggests that change is possible even against seemingly insurmountable odds.
So what's the big takeaway here? What can we learn from Patel's journey and apply to our own lives?
I think one of the most important lessons is the power of information. Patel was relentless in his pursuit of what he believed to be the truth. He dug through documents, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together a narrative that challenged the prevailing one. He didn't just accept things at face value. He questioned, investigated, and shared his findings.
It's like that old saying, knowledge is power, right? But it's not enough to simply have information. We need to analyze it critically, separate fact from fiction, and understand the motivations behind the information we consume.
Exactly. We're bombarded with information constantly, and it's so easy to get caught up in echo chambers and filter bubbles. We need to be savvy consumers of information, seeking out diverse viewpoints and challenging our own assumptions.
And that's where critical thinking comes in. Patel's story reminds us that we can't blindly trust institutions or authority figures. We need to be willing to ask those tough questions, to challenge narratives, and hold those in power accountable.
It's about understanding that everyone has a bias and agenda. And it's our responsibility as citizens to sift through all the noise, identify those biases, and form our own informed opinions.
It's not about being cynical or distrustful, but informed and engaged. It's about being active participants in our democracy, not just passive observers.
And that requires courage. Patel faced significant backlash for challenging the established way of doing things, for speaking out against those in power. He was criticized in the media, accused of disloyalty, and targeted by those who felt threatened by his actions.
But he didn't back down. He believed that exposing what he saw as corruption, even within the highest levels of government, was essential to safeguarding our democracy. He was willing to put his reputation, career, and even his personal safety on the line to stand up for what he believed in.
And that's a powerful message for all of us.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we all have a role to play in holding power accountable. We can't just sit back and expect someone else to fix the problems we see.
Right.
We need to be willing to speak up, get involved, and demand change.
And it often starts at the local level.
Yeah.
Get involved in your community, attend those school board meetings, reach out to your elected officials, support organizations that align with your values. These seemingly small acts of engagement can make a real difference.
Patel's story may seem extraordinary, but it highlights the fact that ordinary citizens can achieve extraordinary things when they're informed, engaged, and dedicated to making a difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Kash Patel's Government Gangsters, I want to leave you with this final thought. If someone like Patel, a self-described political outsider, can uncover these issues and bring them to light, what else might be hidden? And what role do each of us play in holding power accountable?
These are questions worth pondering.
Definitely.
And as you continue to explore these topics, remember to stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop seeking the truth. Because the future of our democracy depends on our active participation, informed engagement, and unwavering commitment to justice and accountability.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.